Hey there, lovely people. Welcome back to another Story Study Saturday. I'm Sammy, and I'm a writer who likes to learn about writing through reading and share what I learn with you. This week is actually kind of a weird one because I'm talking about two books. I will be talking about A Game of Fate and A Touch of Darkness by Scarlet St. Clair, and I want to point out that I was not aware that these two books were in any way, shape, or form related. I am honestly terrible with names. I have a tendency of choosing books without knowing what they are about. And I won A Game of Fate in Kindle format from a Goodreads giveaway. So I read that and I was like, wow, this is a fun book. Cool. And when I finished it, I was like letting it sit for a day like I normally do before I outline a video. And then I got the Goodreads email that you get after you finish reading a book that's like, wow, congrats, you finished reading this book. Here's what other people are saying about it. And I saw one review that basically said, is this the same book told again? Yes. Do I still love it? Yes. I don't know why I read it in that voice. That's just sort of how my brain says it sounds. I was like, what book? What book is it the same book as? Why would you tell the same story again in a different book? Why? So I looked at the author's books. I looked at the other books in the series. They all seemed different. In the Hades saga, they all seemed different. And then I was looking at her other titles and I was like, none of these are the same. None of them are like, they're not in the same format of title. I don't understand. I took a shower and I was standing there and I was like, oh my God, it's A Touch of Darkness. It's a different series. The title is different. There's a touch of darkness. And that was said in A Game of Fate. She said those words in A Game of Fate. So it has to be that one. So then I also read A Touch of Darkness. I technically listened to it because it was available at my library in audiobook form. So I listened to it, finished that in a day. But I wanted to talk about both of them simultaneously because they are the same story told from different perspectives, which is super interesting for a whole lot of different reasons. So if you don't know anything about A Touch of Darkness or A Game of Fate, the same story premise, a basic summary of this is in a modern adjacent world, Persephone and Hades meet and they have a fated yet forbidden relationship. So A Touch of Darkness follows Persephone's perspective of the relationship as she tries to navigate her mortal life and an accidental bargain that she enters with Hades, along with trying to navigate her feelings towards Hades and avoid her mother's wrath over her feelings about Hades. A Game of Fate follows Hades as he tries to catch a mortal who is escaping death and angering the fates, and he tries to appease the fates by catching this mortal and taking his soul the way that it was meant to be taken, etc., so that they don't take Persephone out of his fate, because they are fated to be together. And he does that simultaneously with establishing this relationship with Persephone and trying to get her to embrace the fact that she is a god. So what are my thoughts on these two books? For one, I really enjoyed Hades' perspective, and I don't know if that's because I read it first or if it has to do with the actual story of it, but I really was engaged with his stakes for the story. I felt like his conflict was a little bit more interesting to me than Persephone's was, and the concept of putting them in separate books. Persephone's stakes felt a little bit more personal and smaller in comparison, though they were not like any less intense of stakes. They were just closer to home, closer to her, and I didn't care as much about her as I wanted to. I also really enjoyed that through each book, we saw the other character through the narrator's eyes, and we saw the narrator through their own eyes, and they were so contradictory that you can see the love that they have for each other, even though they don't. In Persephone's case, even though she doesn't want to have it, and in Hades' case, even though Persephone can't see it. And it's really interesting to see those side by side, back to back, having Persephone see the good in Hades, where Hades looks at himself and sees all of the things he's done wrong, and then Persephone sees all of the things that make her insecure, and Hades sees the strength that she has coming from those insecurities. It's really, really nice to see like the rose-colored glasses on the situation, especially when you can see them side by side like that. Like you don't have to miss a moment the way that you would in a shared POV book where you have to keep moving the story forward even though you're switching perspectives. This, you can see the exact same exchanges from both characters' perspectives. You just have to read them separately. I think the world building was really unique, but I also want to touch on that a little bit in my improvements. It's a really interesting way of addressing ancient Greek retellings that I haven't seen done before. but I also have questions about it. So let's get into some improvements that I have, and we'll just keep going on that world building aspect. I realized when I was talking about it out loud that a lot of my things that I enjoyed about the world building were just gaps that I filled in with things that made me feel like it was the right thing to do. Like, I don't really understand the timeline. Like, is this a separate timeline and they just happen to have modern technology like ovens and cell phones? Or is it supposed to be as if ancient Greek sort of happened in the past and then it's also still going on in the modern era? There's a lot of questions I have that I just decided to answer for myself about the world building, but it is still very unique. And I haven't seen anybody do it this way, but I also wish that there was more to it. Like, I'm not usually somebody for blatant exposition, but just answering some of those questions that people have naturally when it's a retelling and they have a base knowledge of what to expect from the story and what happened in the original version and stuff like that, and addressing the things that make yours differently, especially when you're going to step so far away from the original by making it modern that it's confusing but also like satisfying in a way. Some things that I think could be improved about the characters in their respective books. Persephone in A Touch of Darkness specifically felt like we were being told a lot of who she is. It didn't feel like we were seeing her just be herself. And in A Game of Fate, when we interact with Persephone, we're kind of discovering things about her the way that Hades is, so it's not as noticeable as when we are from her perspective, and she should just be acting the way that she acts and doing the things that she does rather than telling us that she does these things, which felt like it drew me out of it a couple of times because I'm like, why is this how we're finding out? And for Hades, he felt pretty like genuinely himself through both books. Like, it was very consistent how we interacted with him, except in A Game of Fate, he had a lot of tendencies to think about how he regrets stuff in a way that just doesn't feel natural. There were ways to motivate it a little bit more, and they just weren't done. So it's like we're just having a conversation, they're talking, it's a cute, like, it's a whole thing, and then Persephone asks a question and then he just goes like totally dark and like emo, like, I have so many regrets, I'm not a good person, I'm so bad at everything. And it's like, dude, can we be a little bit less dramatic here? Because we're in his head, so it's hard to see how that plays out outside of it. It happened more often when he was by himself. So even in Persephone's book, we didn't see how that actually looked on the outside, and it just doesn't feel genuine, but the rest of him did. So the regrets could have been navigated a little bit clearer. There were also times that while reading the two books back to back, the pacing was a little confusing. Like, it felt like there were more things that could happen in between one conversation between Persephone and Hades that's in both books. We've got like situation A, and then they both go off and they do their own thing. And then they got like conversation situation B, whatever that is. And the amount of time in each independent story didn't feel like it lined up with the amount of time in the other story that would have passed between those two situations. But I don't know that that would be noticeable as much if you didn't read them back to back. Like, these books came out several years apart, so a lot of people are like, oh my god, it's a retelling of the retelling, I already like the, like, you remember, you have the nostalgia of the scene that had happened in the first one and you see it from the other's perspective, but you don't necessarily have to pay attention to the time between those two situations, and you don't necessarily have to know either way if you just read one book that that's happening, but the fact that there is a pair of books, that makes it more noticeable. Some things that we can learn from this book: it's a really interesting concept of a retelling, because in a way this is a retelling and a retelling of a retelling. And it's actually really interesting because this isn't something that's done very often in general. The only other thing that I can think of is Midnight Sun, which I haven't read yet, which I'm planning to at some point, but I have to like listen to Twilight again so that I have that fresh in my mind. So I'll have to look into that and see how that one does, because I think this is a really good example of doing that back to back storytelling, side-by-side storytelling more so, where it's from the one character's perspective that you know and love and you relate to and all of that, and then you get the other person's perspective. And as somebody who loves multiple POV books, this is an interesting way of doing that. And there's a part of me that's like, it's a marketing ploy, but it's also a different story. If it was the exact same story and there was like nothing that really made it all that different except for the change of perspective, then that would be something different. But there are different things at stake. There are different conflicts. There's a different part of this world that we are seeing. And it's just those tie-in moments where these characters are together. The only problem I have with it is that they're series and that they're separate, because that kind of just like tells me that it's not a very good relationship, that they have the ability to have the same situation multiple times over multiple books as their relationship is going. And they're having these separate higher stakes, different stakes, whatever. So I'd be interesting to see the rest of them, but at the same time, I want to wait for the third Hades book to come out so that I don't have to wait while I am more hyperfixated. So I'm just gonna like wait until that book comes out next year and see if I'm still interested in reading the rest of those books, because who knows who I'll be then. I think these books are also a really good example of just exploring point of view. It doesn't necessarily have to be between two separate books, but if you wanted to do two different points of view for one story, it might be interesting to explore the way that this does those same interactions but changes that perspective, and see how you can use that to your advantage in a story, like reflecting on a conversation or thinking over something or interacting with the same situation from different characters' perspectives in general, because that might be an interesting way to give that perspective to your readers. But that is all that I've got for you today. If you enjoyed this video, please hit that like button. If you've read either of these two books, let me know in the comments down below what you thought about it. Did you know that they had a partner book? Because I didn't, and I don't know if that's just because I don't pay enough attention or if that's just like a standard thing that people go through. Let's have a little book chat down in the comments. If you don't want to miss any of my uploads, hit that subscribe button and the notification bell next to it. If you have any books that you want me to take a look at, leave me a comment down below and I will check those out. I am here every Tuesday and Saturday for Writing Tip Tuesdays and Story Study Saturdays, so I will see you guys back here on Tuesday for a Writing Tip Tuesday.